feel like we've been very badly talked up. We can't do anything but disappoint you after that introduction, but thank you anyway, I appreciate it. I was wondering that myself. It's quite exciting to know that I am now a mega celebrity, so I don't know. I mean, I don't get stopped on the street very often, but yeah, I don't know. Well, we'll find out after today, won't we?
So we haven't prepared anything very organized, we're just going to chat. I do have one question that I want to kick it off with, which is, so The Wake is a story about the Norman conquest of England in the 11th century, which involved the killing of countless people, the destruction of their villages, the destruction of their ways of life, the imposition of a religion upon them, the introduction of the technology of the castle in England. So I'm wondering, do you think of that as the beginning of, or at least a sort of important inflection point within the emergence of the machine?
Okay, we're into deep history. Here we go. Just to put this in context, what Leighton is asking about is my novel, The Wake. So I've written 3 novels set over 2,000 years of time. The first one is called The Wake, and it's set during the Norman conquest of England in 1066. And it's written entirely in a version of Old English, i.e. Anglo-Saxon English, which would have been spoken by the people at the time, therefore making it impossible to read. But it's still somehow done quite well. It got longlisted for the Booker Prize, which surprised me more than anyone. So that's the first novel I wrote. The second novel is called Beast, and that is set in the present day, sort of. And the third novel is called Alexandria, and that's set 1,000 years from now. And really all 3 of these novels, I suppose, although I didn't plan them to be anything in particular, but they're thematically connected with each other, even though they're a sort of loose trilogy, I suppose. You can read them independently, but they're also connected. And all of them are wrestling with, I suppose, the twin questions of, they're really about collapse. The first one is really about the collapse of a culture. This is the novel you're talking about. The second one is really about a personal collapse. And the third one, which is maybe more relevant to this gathering, is about, well, it's really about a kind of post-apocalyptic, post-technological, post-singularity future. It curiously defends of Eastern England look quite similar to what they looked like in 1066, but a lot of other stuff is happening as well. A lot of people uploading their minds to the cloud. And so to go back to your question.
Actually, before you answer that, Leah, when you were working on The Wake, did you have the idea of the machine already well formulated in your mind? I don't know exactly how the chronology came along in terms of your writing about the machine and your writing your fiction. Was that a German an idea in your mind, or was that a fully formed idea that you sort of deliberately inserted into the story?
No, I think if you start deliberately inserting ideas into fiction, then the fiction is automatically didactic and disastrous. We should probably talk about this idea of the machine before we get into the Norman conquest, actually, because we've been talking about it all weekend and no one's defined it. Yeah. Because it's virtually impossible to define. It's a bit like America or something, right? Try defining that. You kind of know what it is, but you try putting it into words. Try defining yourself. Try defining anything. If you want to know what the machine is, you have to buy my next book, which is called Against the Machine. It's coming out in September, which you can pre-order. So there's the plug. I've done the plug. Thank you very much and good night. So this notion of a machine that we're living within, that it's kind of like a giant control mechanism. We know we can feel it, we can experience it, we can see it manifesting, but it's very difficult to define. It's not my term. I'd love to pretend that I invented it, but I didn't. It's a term I kept coming across when I read poets and novelists writing over the last 100 years or so. It's a term that D.H. Lawrence used. It's a term that R.S. Thomas used. It's a term that Aldous Huxley used and George Orwell used as well. A lot of people since the Industrial Revolution have been talking about machine society and setting it up against a kind of human scale, organic, vernacular society. And we can all feel this thing rising around us. Today it's manifesting very powerfully in digital tech, especially with AI. But the whole thing is wrapping itself around us and making the world very logical, very left-brained, very controlled, very spreadsheety. And so that has been a thing I could feel since I was a child, I suppose. And all of my books are about that in some way or another. And all of my writing, all of my terrible poetry is about that. Because that's the thing I've been able to feel, and that's the thing I could see in films and poetry and novels and all the stuff that I was reading. And so that has seeped its way into all of my writing. even when I tried not to. I would love to be able to write a detective story. It would be great, you know, something fun, but it doesn't work. The machine's always in there. I'm always writing about this same thing. And so this non-fiction book I'm doing is really an attempt to kind of encapsulate that in it's really based on the essays I wrote on Substack over the past few years. Really try to pin this down in non-fiction terms. But to go back to the Norman conquest, if we want to look at the history of England, we'll nerd out. Well, the machine, as much as anything, is, I think, a way of seeing which manifests as technological innovations around us. So it's a way that we see the Earth. If we think that things can be rationalized, if we think that they can be controlled, if we think that we can effectively play God and replace ourselves and replace nature, if we think that we can remake the natural world through the use of genetic technology, if we think that we can do that to humans, if we think that we can upload our minds, we are effectively living within what feels like a giant computer program. We're seeing with our, to use a cliche, with our left rather than our right hemisphere. We're completely dominated by a particular way of seeing, and then that will manifest itself around us in the architecture we have, in the systems that we build, in the computer systems that we create. I mean, there was a discussion this morning about AI, and there were people offering up this notion that technology is just a neutral thing, and what matters is how you use it, and that's complete nonsense. It's not a neutral thing. It comes from a way of seeing. If you create that, then the thing that it will do is to take you in a certain direction. And yeah, sure, it'll do some useful stuff, but you know, it's neutral in the way that a nuclear bomb is neutral, right? It can only do one thing.
Yeah.
And so as soon as you created a society which sees in that way, then everything within that society will take you in that direction.
I was thinking of an analogy with, if you walk around Lower Manhattan, Greenwich Village is one of the oldest neighborhoods in New York, and it's like the streets are just chaotic. They all run into each other. They're curved and a triangle here and an angle here. It makes no sense because it was literally basically a medieval village. And then you walk outside of Greenwich Village and it's the grid plane.
The grid is fascinating. Here's something interesting. If you fly across a city at night, especially an American city because they're very gritty, and you look down, it looks like you are looking in on the inner workings of a computer. Go and get the image up of what a circuit board on a computer looks like, and then look at a city at night, especially a modern grid city. It's the same thing because it's the same idea manifesting itself. I mean, I live in the west of Ireland, and I mean, Paul McNeill will tell you this because he came and visited us last year, and he made the mistake of trying to drive in an American way around the little twisty Irish lanes. He couldn't believe the fact that they're insane because they're made by people going with horses and cars around the place, and then, you know, you have to drive your cars around them. And if you come across a tractor, there's a lot of negotiation that you have to do. But it's a kind of mad human scale thing. It doesn't make rational sense. What if the world doesn't make rational sense? What we're trying to do with this machine is it's a very, very long process in human history in which one particular culture, our culture, has tried to make rational sense of the world, but the world isn't a rational thing. And that's the tragedy of it. So I would say if we're going to define it, we define it like that.
Let's get into the nerdy stuff.
Let's get into so if we want to nerd out about the history of England, I would like to argue that the Norman conquest is maybe the beginning of that process, or at least it's a step forward in that process. You have a great rationalization of religion, you have a rationalization of the landscape, you have the creation of a feudal monarchy, top-down control of the kind that was just being talked about in the last session there. Originates there really. The feudal system begins when the king, the new Norman king of England, takes all the land of England into his own ownership. He says, all of this is mine. A situation which, by the way, is still the case. Technically, the king owns all the land in Britain today. And we all just rent it from him if we live there. He's unlikely to claim it all back, realistically, but theoretically he could. So you have a system that seems to be one step forward in a process of rationalization and control. And really that's what that book is about. It's about one person trying to fight back against that system, and the person who's trying to fight back against it is quite a damaging person in himself. So there's an interesting question of what happens when a bad guy fights on side for goodies, if you like. But I would say that historically speaking, that is what is happening there.
So one of the themes of the book is that this is the guy who's re-embracing the old gods, finding the pagan ways, kind of finding his identity as an Anglo-Saxon and pagan ways. He's got a strong contempt for the Christianity that was brought over and forced onto his civilization. So I'm wondering, in terms of your own faith, how do you reconcile, or do you feel the need to reconcile the idea, the notion that, and I realize that you're not a Roman Catholic, but in this case, the Roman Catholic Church was sort of a part of the apparatus of the machine that was being imposed upon a sort of indigenous, like an organic indigenous culture.
Yeah, well, God has a sense of humour. It turns out, I wasn't a Christian when I wrote that book, and interestingly, The Wake was not supposed to be a book that was in any way about religion, really. It was a book that was based on an interesting, untold story of a guerrilla campaign of resistance against the Normans by the Anglo-Saxons after 1066, which went on for about 10 years. And I found out about it in about 2008, read a book about it, hadn't heard about it. I thought that would make a good subject for a novel. So really it was almost a political novel that I was envisaging. But then this religious subtext crept into it. Now, historically speaking, there were actually not many pagans left in England by 1066, if there were any. England was already Christian. So it was not a country full of indigenous pagans who had been colonized by Christians at all. But I just somehow had this notion that arose, and this sort of thing happens when you write novels, voices arise, in which this man was one of the last worshippers of the old Anglo-Saxon gods, and he had contempt for... He's a libertarian, basically. Okay? He's a libertarian, you'd like him. He hates the Christians, and he hates the control system, and he hates the king. And it's very interesting. I was not a Christian myself at the time. I was much more inclined to that sort of paganism. So, and now I'm an Orthodox Christian. So as I say, God has a sense of humour.
I like this about the story that well, you don't. It's absolutely not a story that romanticizes the pre-Norman Anglo-Saxon civilization. It's extremely violent. The specific Viking ritual that he keeps trying to do to his victims is just disgustingly violent. So when you think about if it is a parable of the machine, which I'm kind of putting that on it, but if it is, then is there something to be said for the good that the machine did by replacing a system? Not that the system that followed was any less violent, but it's not as if what it replaced was idyllic.
No, it's a kind of 11th century Cormac McCarthy novel. So that's the vibe I was going for. No, I mean it's like I say, this notion that the Normans are the machine is not something I had in mind when I wrote that. So you're always in trouble when you romanticize any particular time in the past. When you point to that and say, oh, everything was wonderful here, because nothing was ever wonderful completely anywhere. Certainly not in Anglo-Saxon England. The Normans were horrific and brutal, but the Anglo-Saxons had slavery and the Normans abolished it, for example. So, there's one tick in their box. Humans are humans throughout all societies, but we can create societies which nurture the best side of us and nurture the best relationship we have with the earth and with each other, and we can create societies which dominate and crush it. And this one does the second of those, largely, although it also does the first of those, and it's better than some other societies have been, but the direction it's going in is troubling. So, yeah, as I said, as soon as you point to a period in history, or indeed a period in the future, and say everything is fantastic, romanticising the past and romanticising the future are both generally bad ideas. We can assume that unless the singularity guys get their way, we can assume that we're going to be humans at all periods of time, and therefore we're going to have the same pros and cons and tendencies. And by the way, religion, certainly Christianity, but other faiths too, are designed to rein in the worst of those tendencies and point us towards the best ones, which are supposed to lead us towards God and make us godlike people rather than demonic people. So we have this kind of choice all the time. But the system you're living under, the king you're living under, none of that's an excuse for behaving in a demonic rather than a godlike way. You have to make your choices, don't you? So Anglo-Saxon or pagan, and I was very interested in that book in what happens when. I was very keen not to write an English Braveheart, right, in which you have a kind of, terrible, one of the worst films ever made. I quite like Mel Gibson. It is true. It's a terrible film. It's awful. It's the most unhistorical film. I quite like Mel Gibson, but come on. Anyway, I mean, you want to get into the bit about how he impregnates the former Queen of England with how old she was when he was supposed to have done that? She was 8. I'm just pointing that out. Anyway, we won't get into the question of whether William Wallace was a paedophile. because it's not germane to the discussion. But I was trying not to do that because I wanted to make it a bit more complex. So I wanted the hero to not be a hero. I wanted him to be an anti-hero. Actually, he turned out to be a lot worse than I thought he was going to be. He's actually quite a terrifying character. But you sort of can't take your eyes off him at the same time. I mean, I didn't. It was quite a disturbing voice to write in, but at the same time, I kind of missed him when I finished the book. Which is, I wouldn't like to actually be in his company, but he's very, very engrossing. So I don't really know where he came from. I don't think I could ever create something like that again if I tried. Sometimes these voices arise and you sort of go with them. You don't really know where they came from.
Well, let's not fast forward to right now. So we've had a lot of discussion in this conference about AI, about AI, which clearly, in your view, is not just part of the machine, but maybe the sharp tip of the machine. And then there's a diversity of opinion, I think, in this room about it. What's your opinion about it?
Well,
I'm already done.
Oh, look at that. Swift and efficient. Yeah, there's a whole discussion to be had about that. I mean, AI is broadly demonic, if you ask me. But more to the point, it's part of a bigger movement within technological society towards transhumanism, towards the so-called singularity, towards the merging of people with machines. At best, AI is going to cause a kind of total reality collapse over the next 2 years, right? So very soon you will find it impossible to know whether anything you watch is real. Okay, you're not going to know whether any essay you read by me or anyone else is real. The AI can write it. You won't know whether the video, the film you're watching of President Trump saying something is actually him at all. You won't know anything. You will have no clue whether anyone you're speaking to on the telephone is actually a human or whether they're an AI. It's going to create a kind of rolling reality collapse and paranoia. You could go into the economic discussion about precisely how many people it's going to make redundant. I was having a chat here with somebody yesterday who was telling me he works in the tech field and is currently preparing for 95% redundancies within his organisation. So you've got all these things rolling on, but more broadly, the question that AI raises is how human we want to be and what we actually mean by human. Okay, so again, this is sort of a sliding scale. So I'm sitting here wearing glasses, which is a kind of artificial technology which allows me to see you. On the other hand, I probably wouldn't be half blind if I hadn't spent my life reading books, which is another technology we created. So we probably have to go back before the written word. Actually, I wrote a whole book about that. I wrote a book called Savage God, which is all about me wrestling with the fact that writing is a kind of technology that distances you from the world. So you can go down rabbit holes. But what's happening with AI is we are moving very quickly into a situation in which we are going to sell out our humanity to a machine. And that's, however effective these things are, whatever they do exactly, or what exactly the reality of them is, they are undermining our basic at a radical level. And they're going to continue to do that. And we have to ask ourselves to what degree we want to draw lines. And that's actually the big question in the technological society that everybody has to answer for themselves. Where's the line you're going to draw? Are you going to give your kids a phone? If so, when are you going to give your kids a phone? Are you going to have a phone yourself? Are you going to use AI? Are you going to... what are you going to do? Where's the line you're going to draw and not cross? What sacrifices are you prepared to make? Because if you don't draw a line, you're going to get sucked into a system which is designed by people in Silicon Valley who have an openly spiritual view of what technology is going to do. It's a religious movement, right? Google is created by a religious cult. This is the way it works. The singularity is a religious movement. You can listen to what these guys say. They're very clear about it. We are going to move into a transhuman future in which we improve our bodies by merging with technology. Now, maybe it's all a fantasy. Maybe it won't work. This is actually the theme of my novel, Alexandria. Will it work? Can it work? What do you actually give up? That book is almost a fictionalized debate about the subject. In a future in which half of humanity has decided to go down that route, and some of them have decided to say no to it. How much can you hold off? But, you know, as I said earlier, this is not a neutral situation in which we just have some tech and we can decide to do a good or a bad thing with it. It's taking us somewhere.
Well, you were cautioning earlier against romanticizing about the past and the future, and I think there is somewhat of a romanticization, not just in seeing it as a utopia, but also the opposite, and seeing it as like the apocalypse coming, a dystopia. How do you know that you're not also romanticizing that future by seeing it as this ultimate turning point that's just one thing, and that thing is bad and demonic.
Well, it might be. I mean, look, I have a tendency towards pessimism, but again, no one would call me a doomer optimist. Ashley's been trying to make me an optimist for the last 5 years. Optimistic about something, but not this. Look, so it's interesting to use the word apocalypse, because the word apocalypse literally means that something is revealed. This is what the Greek word means, apocalypsis. That's why the last book of the Bible is the apocalypse of John, the revelation of John. It means that a veil is removed and you can see things as they are. So we tend to use this word apocalypse to mean the end of the world, but it doesn't mean that. It means you can see beyond, you can see the reality of what's going on. And actually I think AI is apocalyptic in that sense, because it reveals to us exactly where this technological system is going, and the direction that the people are designing it are taking us in. So if you listen to the people in Silicon Valley telling you what this is, then I mean, there's plenty of the stuff in my Against the Machine book just quoting these people. They tell you what it is. They tell you that they're trying to create a new consciousness. They tell you that they're trying to behave like gods. Some of them have created their own religion, literally, which is designed to merge humans with machines and take us into this future. And it's easy to say, oh, well, these are just crazy people. You know, Ray Kurzweil, the prophet of the singularity, is the director of engineering at Google. He's defining the systems everybody uses. And by the way, anyone with an iPhone might want to ask themselves why on the back of the iPhone there's a little picture of an apple with a bite taken out of it. Aha! Anybody seen that before? I wonder where that image comes from. But you know, this is not a paranoid fantasy. This is what it's doing. So exactly what will happen, exactly whether AI is just a bunch of numbers or can be something. I don't know exactly. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not a tech guy, but I do know, because my guts are telling me that I'm not going there. And so I'm not telling anyone else they should feel the same thing, but everybody has to make a decision about what their engagement is. We have to have an intelligent relationship with technology, which is not usually a blanket yes or no, because none of us can say blanket no to tech, because we're all in a system that requires us to use it to some degree. So what's your relationship going to be with it?
And I'd be a little bit more skeptical of those folks, the testimonies of those folks from Silicon Valley, because I live in the Bay Area and I grew up in the Bay Area. You know, they've been saying that shit for decades, like since the 1980s, that the personal computer was going to revolutionize everything in 10 years, everything was going to be different, because that world, that personal computing world comes out of left-wing counterculture ultimately, and it was a combination with sort of the military-industrial complex and back to the land type people. And so it's all infused with that kind of utopian idolatry, and it always has been. And so to a certain extent, I think I do roll my eyes at those kinds of, that kind of hyperbole coming from those people, because that's what they do. It's what they've always done.
Yeah, Ray Kurzweil does keep pushing back his days at which we're all going to merge with machines. I think it's gone back to 2045 now. I think it was going to be 2030.
The guy with the sandwich board.
So yeah, well it is, but at the same time, this stuff has revolutionized our lives, right? I mean, look, everybody now has a smartphone, everybody's addicted to it, and everybody's dependent upon it. We all have laptops, we all have the internet, we all have email. I am old enough to have grown up in a time before that was the case. And so actually our lives have been completely revolutionized. We're all completely attached to screens whether we like it or not. Even those of us who are trying to spend less time on screens find that we have to actually almost have a kind of 12-step program to avoid them. You know, this is the point that we've got to. So even if the wildest fantasies of Kurzweil and the rest of them don't come off, and to some degree they won't, because you're not you cannot upload your mind to a machine. What does that even mean? The human mind cannot exist outside the substrate of the physical body, which is again one of the themes of Alexandria. You can't just do that. So I don't think that's going to happen. But lots of other things are going to happen on the way to trying to make that happen, if you see what I mean. So you don't have to believe the worst crazy theories of these guys to see that the revolution is already in place.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want to diminish the technological changes that already happened and that are happening. On the other hand, like, this is a controversial subject. There's probably diversity of opinions in this room about climate change. But for the last, 30 years or so, we've been hearing about the end of the world coming from climate change. Maybe it's still coming. Maybe it's 10 years away. But I have the suspicion that there's a certain psychic need that's fulfilled for some reason among in the modern world there's a fantasy about the end of the world. There's a fantasy about the collapse of civilization. There's a fantasy of wiping the slate clean and starting all over again. which people seem to need in their lives. I mean, you saw it around COVID when people were just embraced the lockdowns and didn't want to end them. They didn't want the crisis to be over. And so I just wonder to what extent, without trying to diminish the actual real the transformation of AI, to what extent it might also be developing into kind of a myth, sort of a mythic force that people need to replace climate change, which doesn't seem to be in the news much anymore.
Well, look, climate change is just one manifestation of the kind of stuff that Peter Allen was telling us about this morning. And if you went to his presentation and watched all the graphs of the collapse of the minerals in the soil and everything else, climate change happens to be the thing that a certain group of people have turned into a media event. And that doesn't mean it isn't real, because it is real in my view. But it's one of a suite of things that are a result of the industrial civilization that we live in, fighting a war against the natural world, which is exactly a manifestation of that machine mentality. And I thought Peter's presentation was absolutely brilliant on that, from a very practical level. Like, here's what we're actually doing. Okay, and the climate is changing. Even if you don't want to believe that, go and have a look at the state of the soil, go and have a look at the state of the rivers. It's all part of the same attitude. So it is true that we are quite an apocalyptic society. I suspect that America is maybe very apocalyptic even compared to Europe, but we all have this sort of strain within us. But I started this organization called the Dark Mountain Project in 2009, which was a network of writers and artists, and it still exists, although I'm not involved in it anymore. We wrote a little manifesto called Uncivilization, and it was a call for writers and artists to try and behave as if we were living through times of radical change. And one of the points we made in there was precisely the one you just made, that it's actually very easy to embrace an apocalyptic mindset which says, oh, well, everything's going to end, right? So it's a total disaster, everything's collapsing. It's also very easy, conversely, to embrace a progressive mindset in which you say, well, everything's going to be fine because technology will sort the problems out. I don't think either of those things is very likely to be true. The world is probably not going to end in fire in 10 years. I mean, it might do, depending on who gets nuclear weapons when, and how many bunker busters are dropped. I don't know. But, it's unlikely that we'll get the easy option of having an immediate apocalypse, or that we will have Elon Musk's dream of living in space like heroes. We're probably going to get a kind of stumbling collapse at the same time as we get a kind of techno-accelerationism, and we're all going to have to work our way through this kind of weird combination of both of these things. I mean, you can see it in this country and in many others at the same time, right? I mean, you've got parts of the country, and it's true of Europe too, that look like they're in a kind of post-industrial collapse already. And then you've got other parts of the country which are kind of techno-utopian, driverless cars and all the rest of it, existing at the same time in the same place. So that looks far more likely to be the kind of weird, techno-feudalistic future that's emerging, rather than something as easy as conquering stars or immediately collapsing.
Yeah. My brother is an environmental historian. He wrote a book in which he traces these strains within the environmental movement. In the 1950s, the Sierra Club was a conservation organization, and that's what they were. They didn't, the term environmentalism didn't exist. They were there preserving nature because they saw the way in which civilization was plowing through these beautiful natural landscapes. And that was their mission until that started to seem passé because of other threats that were facing the planet. Some of them were more real than others, around the carrying capacity of the planet, and overpopulation, and all the crises in the 1970s that were sort of brought to bear. And then the Sierra Club all of a sudden seemed antiquated. And so it seems to, so this is what I'm trying to get at, is that it seems to me like the problem is big enough when you frame it as we're losing our wild places, we're losing nature, we are, the division between human and nature is not turning out well for civilization. This is an existential issue. You don't need to gild the lily by saying, and also, in 15 years, we're all going to be dead.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, a lot of that stuff is marketing, right? A lot of this, we have 100 months to save the earth stuff is marketing. But the reason that organizations like the Sierra Club moved from just doing conservation to bigger picture stuff is that they could see that the picture was much bigger than just, let's preserve Yosemite because it's good. Yeah, you do need to do that. But at the same time, you have a global industrial system which is stripping the seas of fish and destroying the minerals in the soil, changing the climate, and destroying 50% of the world's forests and causing extinctions all over the world. Because of this giant extractive machine that we live in, so that we can feed ourselves with a load of crap that we don't need. So what are you going to do about that? That's an existential question, which is about human society. How do we live?
Do you take the beginning of that, what you're talking about, is that a modern phenomenon, or is this something that goes back into the deeper history that you bring about?
Well, civilizations rise and fall, and some of them fall because they stripped away their land base. Sustainability is a horrible, boring corporate word, and we all hate it, but it's also a real thing. If you can't sustain your culture dies off. And every civilization that's existed has died off for some reason, for different reasons. There's no reason that this one couldn't do the same thing. Will do the same thing if it's not sustainable ecologically, culturally, socially, economically, for whatever reason. So that's a good goal to aim for. You don't have to engage in apocalyptic discussions of any kind. You do have to be hard-headed about what's going on. Because sometimes not wanting to engage in apocalyptic discussions could be an excuse for saying, oh, well, everything's fine, really. Let's not be hysterical, everything's cool, let's just go with what's going on. And like I say, it's about having an intelligent relationship with notions of progress, technology, understanding where it's going, deciding how much you're going to participate in it, which is why everybody has a different opinion, because you may have a different personal answer to that. There's no one blanket thing everybody could do, but you have to understand the kind of direction of travel and where it's headed and the forces. A lot of the talk this afternoon has been about the forces that are actually controlling the culture that we live in and what you can do about them. And it's important just not to be naive about, say, technology in the same way it's important not to be naive about politics or corporate power or any of these other things. You don't have to be hysterical about them, but you do have to notice what's going on and who's actually in control of it.
We talked about some very big themes about human survival, but I want to hear your thoughts also on the threat of AI specifically to art and human creativity.
Well, we can all see that. We're in a really interesting tipping point at the moment, because this AI thing, whatever it is, whether it's just a collection of ones and zeros, or whether it's a more sinister spirit, or whatever, what it enables people to do is to undermine human creativity at quite a radical level. So, for example, the number of people using terrible AI art to illustrate their online stuff, for example, is just ugly and horrible, and it's taking work away from actual artists, and it's fake. And the same thing is true of writing. Increasingly, I've noticed an increasing number of writers making arguments for why writers should use AI, because hey, it's convenient and it will help you to get your spelling right and all the rest of it. If you don't draw a line underneath that, you notice that very, very quickly indeed, any actual individual creative work is going to be undermined and destroyed by AI slop everywhere. In fact, I was thinking a while back, a month or two ago, that I was going to start a campaign called Writers Against AI. And I wasn't sure about it, but then hearing some of the AI stuff today, I've actually decided I'm definitely doing it. So I'm going to launch it. I'm launching a little thing on my Substack quite soon. It's going to be called Writers Against AI, and if you want to sign up to it as a writer or an artist, you commit yourself not to use AI, you commit yourself not to support writing and art that's created by AI, and you commit yourself to supporting people who are actually doing human creative work without getting a crappy machine to do it for them. And you can choose whether to do that kind of thing or not, but again, draw the line. Decide what you want to do. Do you want to support somebody who's worked out how to become a woodcarver over 10 years and create beautiful art, and you have to pay them for it because they have to make a living? Or do you want to tell some bullshit chatbot to create you an ugly picture of something that you can just spring out there? And do you want to spend 30 years trying to get good at the craft of writing, which I've done? I don't know if I have got good, but that's what I've done. Or do you just want to get Elon Musk's stupid machine to spray out some crap based on everything everyone else has written? You decide. You decide. Do you want great novels? Do you want Edgar Allan Poe in future? Do you want him? Or do you want some piece of crap on the internet to do a fake version of him? Because if you want Edgar Allan Poe, you have to have strange, damaged people wandering the culture being radically creative, right? You have to have idiosyncrasy. You have to create the kind of culture that can create Mark Twain, right? This country's produced amazing writers, and you're going to replace them with AIs, they would never have existed within the kind of technological society. Huckleberry Finn has no chance to go down the Mississippi, right, in some freaking electric taxi or something. So, what do you want? Do you want the culture that can produce Huck Finn and all the other things that the best of American literature's produced, or do you want Elon Musk and his stupid spaceships. You choose.
I was thinking earlier today in response to some of the sessions that I feel like there's a misunderstanding that proponents of AI have when they talk about labor saving, the labor saving promises of AI. Because at least when you're talking about human creativity, it kind of reminds me of the scene in Karate Kid where he's doing the wax on, wax off thing, and then he doesn't know why he's doing it. It's tedious. He's done it 10 days in a row, and then Mr. Miyagi shows him that it's actually one of these blocking moves. But he's got the muscle memory because he's done it for so long, and that's what a craft is. And so it's sort of like the tedious work in art, at least, is that that's not the stuff that you have to do to get to the artistic production stuff. That is the shit. Like that is the process that you don't get good without it.
That's exactly it. And this as a writer as well, right? So because this society is radically left-brained and focused on content production, right? Everybody thinks that the point is the content. All we need is the content. So look, isn't AI great? It can efficiently get us to the point where we've got a ton of content. That's not the point. That's not the point of art. It's not the point of writing. The point is that people spend their lives slaving away and probably destroying themselves in the process in order to get to the point that Picasso can have his blue period, right? Or that, that name your favourite poet has got to the point where they can see beyond the veil and create a work of astonishing beauty. AI is never going to do that. It will be able to do a fake version of it that sounds like that, but the seeing has never been there. The perfection of the craft has never been there. If you're not prepared to put up with imperfection and insanity and Hemingway blowing his head off, or whatever it is, right? Then fine, have a perfect, relaxed society in which nobody's stressed and we're all flying on CPT all the time and AI is producing bland slop and we're pretending that we like it. Then you might as well be dead, because what's the point of a society that has no creative juice to it, that does not create beauty, that does not create trouble, that does not damage people in some way, that does not allow them to struggle? You're not going to get anything of any worth. You might get a ton of economic productivity, great, fantastic, and no one will have a job and we'll all have a basic income and we're smoking weed all day and pressing buttons, fantastic. Right? I don't want to live in that world, thank you.
I feel like since you proposed probably half the room,
sorry about that, guys. Sorry.
I think this is a good time to ask her to open it up.
Okay.
Raise your hand. What a question?
Hey, I'll just shout.
No.
You've been interviewed like for dozens of years, well, over a dozen years now. You've been asked a lot of different questions. What's one of the more interesting questions you've been asked over that period of time that you kind of want to share with us tonight?
Yeah, what one piece he says. Yeah. It's a very good question, actually. I'm kind of put on the spot there. It's a very good question. I suppose that one of the questions I've been asked a couple of times is about parenting, because I've written a bit about how we homeschooled our children and tried to bring them up in a particular way. And so I have been asked, what's the secret to good parenting? And one of my children is here, so he's probably laughing at that. I actually don't know what the answer is. But it's interesting because we can talk about these questions of technology and society and economics and the rest of it. And we can talk about that as individuals, but those of us who are parents have to think about how to sort of release children into this world, sparing them the worst of it, but also educating them so they can navigate it. And the question of how to do that is actually the most interesting question for me. Because we can all have our own theories about what's good and bad, but kids have to navigate this world that's full of the stuff that I just talked about, whether you love it or hate it. And they have to remain human. You can't totally shield them and protect them from that, but at the same time, you have to give them the tools to navigate it. So that's maybe one of the most interesting questions, is how you do that. And not that I would pretend to know how to answer it, but...
So in terms of your conversion to the Orthodox Church, in what ways do you see the Orthodox Church having exempted itself from the effects of the machine? And do you think that there is a potential reform within the Protestant Church that would allow itself to detach itself from the tentacles of the machine? And do you have any recommendations for those who would still find themselves in the Protestant Church?
Ooh, that's controversial, isn't it? I'm going to get into trouble with at least 50% of the audience. I would not.
Well, it's just like Margaretville all over again.
It's
New York.
disaster. Okay, I'm not going to give any advice to Protestants or anyone else. But I'll tell you what, I mean, I would love to say that the Orthodox Church is a kind of bastion of anti-tech intelligence and critique, but it isn't entirely. Look, I visited Mount Athos a couple of years ago. I visited it twice now. Mount Athos is the Orthodox monastic republic in Greece, which has existed for 1,000 years. Only monks live there, 20 or 30 monasteries. Quite an astonishing place, but I was astonished and depressed when I got there to see monks walking around with smartphones, right? Would you believe? Not all of them, but some of them. I don't know why a monk needs a smartphone, especially on Mount Athos. So I would like to pretend that the Orthodox Church is an intelligent critique, but it doesn't always. Having said that, and this is not particularly to cast aspersions on any other form of Christianity or anything, but because the Orthodox Church is very rigid, you know the old joke about the Orthodox is how many Orthodox Christians does it take to change a light bulb? Change? That's the joke. There it is. Orthodox humour. You know, and there's an actual defence of the tradition which says we actually haven't changed our liturgy for 1,000 years and no one's going to. There's no pope who has the power to do it. Everyone's a bit sort of ornery, as I believe you would say here, about it. And so there's a defence of that tradition which means that, for example, the liturgy will not be infiltrated by big screens and AI priests. There's a little bit of stuff in my book against the machine about AI priests, by the way, which have started popping up in various churches around the world. I don't think we'll get that in Orthodoxy, but we still have plenty of people with smartphones and all the rest of it. So there's an intelligent critique that is starting to arise in the Orthodox Church, but actually also in other Christian denominations as well. So regardless of whether you're Orthodox or Protestant or whatever, I mean, look, my basic line in the sand is, I'm not going to a church that has a screen in it. I'm just not doing it. And luckily I don't.
Or a restaurant.
Or a restaurant, no. No screens, but no, you know, I just can't stand that stuff. But there's a lot of, I mean, look, this is the country of Wendell Berry, right? So you have an intelligent Christian critique of technology here. You don't need me to give that to you, and that's a Protestant critique as well. So I would just say whatever sort of Christian you are, or indeed whether you're not a Christian and you have another faith, again, the relationship with technology in your church or in your temple is vital as well, because again, that stuff takes you in a certain direction. I mean, my view is digital technology will take you away from God, even if just in the basic sense of distracting you to such a degree that you can't contemplate anything. So, yeah, that's, again, what relationship should you have to that? That's the question.
I got another ortho bro right here, John.
Hi, Paul. Yeah, I have a sort of a very specific Orthodox question. I'm actually glad he went first because this builds on it. So, what are your thoughts on iconography and AI? And one of the things I'm concerned about, and not so much at the present moment, but maybe on in the future, is that, you know, if you're Orthodox, you go and buy a printed icon, you're maybe aren't going to be sure if it was enhanced by AI or generated by AI. Would that even be a legitimate icon? And do you see the possibility that Orthodox practitioners go back to hand-painted icons? You know, the Russians are pretty hardcore until pretty recently about only using hand-painted icons. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
That's interesting. I've never seen an AI icon. I'm hoping never to see one. But yeah, traditionally in the Orthodox Church, obviously icons are hand-painted, and that's still a big thing right across the church. You can also get kind of, you know, copies that you can buy, because obviously the hand-painted ones are very expensive. I've never seen an AI-enhanced one. I hope never to see one. I wouldn't see the need to do it. But again, you know, this comes back to the same question. Not only do we as individuals have to decide where we draw our line in relation to this stuff, but so do churches and institutions. What are you going to do here? If you don't draw the line, you just get drawn down that path, because it's always going to be easy and convenient to do this stuff. So do you want ease and convenience, or do you want truth and beauty? There's your choice. And you know, in some areas of life that's more clear-cut than others. I think in the case of iconography, it's very clear-cut, actually. There's no excuse for using AI to create an icon. You don't need to do it. And again, because the Orthodox are very unchanging, hopefully that won't be happening much. But I don't know. Things are moving so fast right now that it's incumbent on everyone to decide where they stand in relation to it, whether they love it or whether they hate it or whether they're not sure. Better think about, you know, where the kind of bottom line is. It's a good question.
So I have a question kind of about technology and the anthropocene. So I've been writing and thinking about this like environmental crisis and the anthropocene for a really long time. kind of began around the time of Dark Mountain doing its already. And it what seemed to me really interesting at that time, like early to 2010 or something like that, was that there were so many people talking about environmental crisis and like, widespread kind of degradation in the natural world. And it seemed like there was a potential for this real opening, like for experimentation in other ways of living and relating to the earth and so on. But what has struck me as astonishing is how, in the decade or more since that time, there has been mostly this like solidifying kind of like moral code of degrowth, of anti-Prometheanism, kind of almost anti-humanism that's really emerged as like a proper response to the situation that we find ourselves in, that you've been describing. And I just wonder, my question is sort of, well, why can't another kind of, Prometheanism or other kind of technical exploration be a legitimate response to the world that we find ourselves in? Like, why couldn't SpaceX rockets be another means of achieving truth and beauty and like recreating a poetic relationship to technology in this moment? Like, why is that possible? Or why is it?
Well, I suppose it depends on what you mean by truth and beauty. I mean, I would see that, actually, that technological response to the environmental crisis as being absolutely the mainstream response at the moment. I mean, yeah, sure, there are some activists who think that we should degrow, including me, but that's not the mainstream response at all. The mainstream response is, right, we're going to grow food in vats now. Again, as Peter Allen was saying this morning, we're going to replace the cattle with synthetic beef. We're going to use technology, we're going to get up there into space, and we're going to mine the asteroid belt. That's the reason they're very keen to get to the asteroids, by the way. They're absolutely full of minerals and water and gold that we need, because we're stripping the Earth of all the minerals and water and gold so that we can put the stuff into our industrial system and into our smartphones, so that we can all look at TikTok all day. So there is a potential for intelligent, appropriate technology to enhance truth and beauty, definitely. Humans have always used technology, there's no getting away from that. But again, what kind of technology is it? Who controls it? What does it do to enhance creativity, and what does it do to replace it or smother it? That would be my question. And I don't think that anything that's Promethean can be anything other than destructive, because Prometheus steals fire from the gods, right? Prometheus does that so that he can seize power that's illegitimate. It's the equivalent of eating the apple in the garden. So technology in itself is not the issue if the technology is a tool that we use to do a thing. That's what humans do. We can't survive without technology. We get eaten by bears in 5 minutes. A spear is technology, right? So the question is what system the technology is existing within. So I actually think that, I wrote a whole book about this, Confessions of a Recovering Environmentalist, and a lot of the essays never exactly about this Promethean environmentalism, which I think is exactly the mainstream of the movement at the moment. It's going to be vat-grown food and AI and harvesting of asteroids, and all of this stuff is presented as a solution. But again, it's the spreadsheet brain solution. It's not a beauty. It's not appropriate technology. It's superpower. So again, some people think that is truth and beauty. Elon Musk thinks it is. That's how he finds his truth and beauty. So you choose you choose what you think truth and beauty are, I suppose. That's the point of a human life. So. But it is a good question, but I think that's actually where we're going.
You mentioned screens distancing us from I'm wondering if you've ever taken a long sabbatical from screens, and if so, what did you do?
I'm trying to do it all the time, but it's very difficult. It's hard. It is hard, but I have. I took a year off after I wrote this book, Savage Gods, which was kind of midlife crisis book about writing and whether it was actually a good thing or not. I took a year off writing. I didn't write anything, and I didn't look at screens too much. At the moment, I try to take several days a week off looking at screens. And what I discover when I do it, for any length of time, is that my brain changes, actually. My brain changes. My brain goes back to the state it was in when I was a child. I can remember what it was like to just read books and experience the world. And I was always a booky child, so I was always in books. So, okay, a book is also a form of technology which takes you to an artificial world. Absolutely. But there's a big difference between looking at that and looking at the scrolling screen. And time off screens just makes you calmer. Just makes you calmer. It allows you to focus. There's a ton of science, we've probably all heard it, about how time spent on screens shatters the attention spans of people, especially young people. I find that the more time I can take off them, the calmer and more focused I become. But I also find that there's a kind of little addictive person at the back of my mind going, oh, you better get back on, because you might be missing something. And you need to write something, otherwise you'll have no readers and then you'll starve to death. And you need to read the news in case something big has happened, blah, blah, blah. And there's always this little voice that's always there trying to suck you back in. It's very interesting to watch that. And I just remember what the world was like before it. I'm old enough to have lived sort of half of my life before the internet and the other half without. And if I had a big red button I could press to turn it off, I'd press it. But so there's, again, that's the line. How do you negotiate your time off screens and the time you need to spend on them? And what kind of time do you spend on them? We all have to do that to some degree. But I do find if I spend long enough off, I mean, my fantasy is to have a whole year off screen, but I can't. But I would love to, and I would, there's a book in that. But anyway.
I've got a question for you. Hearing you talk and the kind of doomer perspective that you bring with AI, I think a lot of us in the room, it certainly resonates. I'm curious why, we've had a lot of talk today about AI and sort of the good that can be done with AI. Why is AI not just another technology, right? You mentioned your eyeglasses and the technology you're using the internet to disseminate information. Why isn't AI just another tech that needs to be navigated to use it for good and avoid the aspects that are for evil?
My glasses aren't connected to the internet. That's the simple answer. I mean, look, AI is just the next stage of what the internet has done altogether already. So it's not as if the web itself is inherently benign and AI is very bad or something like that. It just takes it into a whole new artificial dimension. And the problem with it is that it's artificial, because in the name, right? It's not intelligent, but it is artificial. And so even with, the internet is a big thing that can do a lot of different stuff, but the minute you start to get yourself sucked into that technological web, as I said earlier, you're being taken in a different direction. Marshall McLuhan, the great critic of media, he said the notion that technology is neutral is the numb stance of the technological idiot. So he liked to be very frank about these things. Technology is never neutral, it's created to do a certain thing. Digital technology takes you into a certain way of seeing, into a certain world, which we almost don't notice because we've all been captured by it. We're all on our screens, we always think in a certain way, we all have spreadsheet brain, this, that and the other. So AI will allow us just to go further and further down that path, and it will, as I said earlier, remove our humanity from the equation. So even if AI is not an intelligent super being or Satan at work or something like that, even if it is just maths, as people were saying earlier, it's maths that takes us into a very particular relationship with reality. So what relationship do we want to have to reality, which is touching the grass and all that stuff, right? What relationship do we do? Do we want to touch the grass, or do we want to get AI to do us a picture of someone touching the grass by just putting a prompt in? Or do we want to paint somebody touching the grass using paint? Think about this. What's the fundamental difference between picking up some oil paints or some pencils and painting a picture of, say, Paul McNeil, or putting a prompt into Grok or whatever that says, paint me a picture of Paul McNeil? You get a picture in both cases. Maybe the AI picture would be better in technical terms than something I could do, but it's creatively dead. It's a radically different relationship with the product at the end point. And as Leighton was saying, it takes the actual human creativity out of the picture. So even on the internet, as it is pre-AI, there's a lot of space for human creativity. I mean, I write essays on the internet, right? People publish their art on the internet. They sell their art on the internet. They advertise gatherings like this on the internet. There's lots of potential to do human-scale stuff through the web. And of course, as you were also saying, the early web pioneer guys saw the internet as being this way of connecting lots of human-scale things. It was supposed to be a giant corporate monstrosity. But that's what it's become. It's a profiteering corporate thing that will destroy jobs on a very practical level, but also suck the creativity out of it. So, what do you want to do? What do you want to see? Do you want efficiency or do you want creativity? That's how it looks to me anyway.
I'm next. I'm wondering what you think. I don't know if you have any opinions about our new American Pope. Not only American, but from Chicago's South Side. Sox fan. But he's also bringing back, I have this concept of like revival, of bringing forth of something from the past. And then I also am curious, when you first came to the Wagon Box, you hadn't been in America for a couple of decades, and you kind of thought of it as like, you know, McDonald's and globalization and, you know, this kind of like lefty sentiment of America as hegemon. So I'm asking this Pope question through the lens of, you know, Paul Kingsnorth does America. What are your thoughts? What role do we have here? I mean, maybe via the Pope or maybe just in general. What are your...
It's a very Catholic question. Well, look, I thought Donald Trump was going to be the Pope because I saw an AI picture. And I was so convinced that I thought, my God, not that as well. No, surely this can't be happening. But it turned out that the AI picture was incorrect. And I don't know, I don't have any opinions about the American Pope. I mean, he seems quite an interesting character, actually. Very fascinating to have an American Pope. And it's going to be quite interesting to see what he comes up with and what he challenges. Yeah, it was a bit of out of left field, that, wasn't it? What I said when I first came to the Wagon Box, actually, was that there are lots of different Americas and I'm just a visiting Englishman, but the whole hegemonic American empire, McDonald's and corporate power is very real. And it's kind of colonized the world. But beneath that is a much more interesting, much older, maybe more, I don't know, Jeffersonian American kind of story, which I always really liked. My first book was called One No Many Yeses, and it was a travelogue all about anti-globalization movements around the world, and one chapter was devoted to anti-corporate activists in America who were doing that Jeffersonian thing. Now, this being 2003, they were all on the left, right? Because the right had nothing to do with that stuff. It was too busy worshipping the Iraq War and Monsanto. Everything seems to have flipped rather a lot now. And so now there's a bunch of conservative guys sitting around and talking about how we all need to be Jeffersonian. So, but that's the older American tradition, and that's great, and that's really interesting, and I've always been very interested in it. And it's still going along, and each country has its own version of this older tradition of actual human scale vernacular stuff, which has been slathered over by this corporate crap for the last X number of years. But that is unsustainable as a system. That's why it's falling down. So that's why it's actually very good to have human scale gatherings of people talking about how to do different things. So that would be my answer to that.
Thank you so much for being here, Paul. It's such a treasure to see you here in Wyoming, of all places. You've observed that civilization isn't maybe going to end in the future. Christian civilization already ended. Maybe it's been dead for a couple of centuries, in fact, and we've been living in the ruins for a while. I think I agree. I'm very interested, though, in what are the conditions in which culture can be renewed or reborn. Like, what is actually culture? I think you've gestured toward the idea that it depends on a sacred story. But what possibility is there in America when we live in radically pluralistic conditions? And it's very hard to have a concentration of people devoted to the same story that has any strength. And I think for my own story, like, I've recommitted to Mormonism because it's a tribe of a particular history and at least in Utah, a place. But I'm curious what hope is there for us Americans? Like, what is culture? How to renew it?
Well, I don't know that you all need to have one story. I mean, in one sense you do, but I mean, why does America have to be one thing in which everyone agrees on something? That's plainly not going to happen. I mean, look, I come from Ireland. I was in Montana a couple of days ago, which is 5 times as big as Ireland and has a fifth of the population or something. And that's just one state. The Europeans cannot get our heads around how big this place is. There's a great joke about the difference between Europeans and Americans, by the way. Americans think 100 years is a long time, and Europeans think 100 miles is a long distance. I always tell that joke in America, sorry. But it's good, it's true. You're not going to have one culture here. Why do you have to have one? You don't need to have that. But if you were a Christian, say, it always seems to me, I've tried to think about this a lot myself since I became a Christian. There is one story, there is one God. But it has many different cultural manifestations, that story. I mean, even in the Orthodox Church, all the Orthodox churches are different national churches. They have different sort of ethnic and cultural flavour. They have different language, perhaps. They have different saints that they're interested in. They have, their national days celebrated in the church. But it's still the same church, and it's still the same God. So there's the broader story. Every culture has to be orientated towards God, otherwise it just dies away. If you think God is real, that just has to be the answer to things, right? And it may be orientated in a slightly different way, otherwise you're going towards homogenization again. So if there's a story, the story is you have to try and live as God wants you to live. And that may manifest itself culturally in different places. That's great. Christianity has so many different flavors around the world. And you can still be following the truth in a different, from a different angle, with a different flavor, with a different cultural story behind it. The worst thing about the globalization process has been the homogenization of culture. This attempt to create this bland, uniform, corporate, borderless blob in which we're all the same. And it's not going to work, because we're not all the same, because places are different, people are different, history is different. And that doesn't have to be a thing that divides us so that we hate each other. It could be a thing that can actually be celebrated. So yeah, diversity is our strength.
Paul and Leighton,
in a good way.
sorry to interrupt. In terms of schedule, I'm going to have Jackson be the last question for now, but if you didn't get called out, I'll make sure I corner Paul in the bar and make him talk to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I look forward to it. You have to buy me a drink if you want to ask me a question.
So my wife and I have a pet theory we've been developing over dinner, and you've spoken to polarization and deciding where you stand on different issues, and I'm curious what you think of the possibility of a global schism where there's a political realignment and half the world supports AI and half the world does not, and whether that's likely, and if it is, whether that would be good or not.
I think half the world not supporting AI would be extraordinary, actually, given the direction of travel at the moment. But there is a schism, yeah, there's already a schism. One of the quotes that I opened my book Against the Machine with, I think, is from Wendell Berry, who says, and he wrote this in one of his essays decades ago, he said he could see a future in which the choice we have to make is whether we want to live as machines or whether we want to live as creatures. And Wendell Berry's always been several decades ahead of the crowd, and that's the choice you have, I think. So I very much doubt whether half the world would say no to AI. I don't know, who knows? But lots of people in the world are already thinking about how to live outside, or where to draw their lines, right? I mean, there's a lot of that discussion here. So I don't know, but I could definitely see a future in which there is a technological schism. Again, I sort of explored that fictionally in my book Alexandria. That's really what that's about. What happens if a small group of people, or maybe a larger group of people, decides they're not going to be uploaded to the cloud. They're not going to go with this future. They're going to retain their humanity at some level. I don't know if anyone's seen the Dune films that came out that are based on the novels that were written, I think, in the 50s or the 60s. And Dune is very interesting because this isn't tackled in the films, but what happened in Dune, and the reason there's limited form of technology in Dune, is that there was something called a Butlerian jihad against technology in the past that has set up this world. And this is named after an English author, Samuel Butler, who wrote a book called Erewhon, the title of which is the word nowhere spelled backwards. And in Erewhon they can see, this is written about the 1860s, right? So it's another one of these machine books that predicts all this happening. And in Erewhon, the people can see that machines are going to become intelligent and destroy them. And so they have effectively, they make a choice to randomly choose a year, after which they will destroy all technology that has been created after that time, and they won't move beyond it. So they choose like 1850 or something. And they smash up all the machines created after 1850 and they stop there. It's a good thing to discuss over a few drinks, by the way. What would be the year you would choose if you were going to do this? So in June there had been a Butlerian jihad against technology. They destroyed all the tech that was taking them towards intelligent machines because machines began taking over. And so they have tech, but they have tech at a level they choose. It's kind of like Amish in space, what it is, right? And kudos to the Amish, who I'd like to know a lot more about, but they have a very intelligent attitude towards technology, by the way. So yeah, I think there will be that division, and people will have to make that choice. Yeah.
All right, guys, we're about at 7:40, so we are up to dinner.
Yeah, I'm going to just say one thing. I'm going to do the commercial break. I'm going to do the anti-AI commercial break. One of the things I've been doing, other than trying to work up my Writers Against AI campaign, is that my wife, Nav, and I, who is here tonight, are setting up a tiny little human-scale publishing house, which is called Hermit Crab Press. and it produces little artisan books. At the moment, it's just doing a few of my books, but I don't want to publish with big publishers. But we're putting it out there. We haven't even done it yet. There are no books published. There are no nothing for sale, nothing advertised. But we have printed our first book, which is a little collection of my poems, and I did bring a few of them here. So if you'd like one, you can come and get one here.
And I did randomly open to a
And you did,
page and read it.
well done, thank you very much. And so if you want to buy a book, come and buy a book. That's a slight commercial break, but it's, I don't know. What do we do if we actually want to create at a human scale? I'm a writer, so that's the sort of thing I do, but everybody here has the question, I think, same question looming over them. So you can accept or reject the question, but it's the thing I would want to take away from this whole gathering is that question. Do I draw a line? If I do draw a line, what is it? And given who I am in my life and the things that I do, what do I do? Where do I take it? How do I use my skills in a way that kind of keeps things human, right? Make America human again. Here we are. That's a mic drop moment.
Please do not drop the mic.
Thank you and good night.
Here, friends. Thanks again, Paul. Thanks for Leighton. We do have dinner, which will be momentarily ready. Afterwards, we will probably